want to begin with you, Robert, by asking if you could maybe tell us about the memorandum that you signed. A couple of words. What was it all about?
Yeah, thank you. Well, great presentation by one of our members of Cellular Agriculture Europe. We were pleased to sign this memorandum of understanding to help be a partner with Lithuania in building a cellular agriculture ecosystem here in the country. There's been several examples around Europe. I think the Netherlands being a leader, Denmark now stepping up, and seeing a real opportunity in the bioeconomy space to make investments that grow jobs, grow a new industry, and complement the existing agriculture system. So we're looking forward to partnering and helping bring knowledge sharing and expertise to help Lithuania however they need in order to build that ecosystem here as well.
And where is Lithuania in terms of alternative proteins? Maybe we could hear from Lithuania, the Ministry of Economy, yes, but are there measures that you're introducing to foster the usage of alternative proteins?
Thank you very much, Živile. So where is Lithuania is a very good question. Lithuania right now, I think, is trying to solve all these issues that were mentioned by Aleph farms that they were speaking about before. From regulatory issues, we want to be active in participating in the discussion that is happening right now on the EU level. Of course, we have some homework as well to do here in Lithuania, even under common current very strict regulatory European framework. We still have some things that we can adopt right now in Lithuania to foster the technologies here, for example, tasting. We also are in the situation where we need to grow our talent pool because right now, of course, we have universities that are developing technologies that are actively working. Me, myself, I have been a few months ago visiting Kaunas, where scientists are growing rabbit meat from scratch. Yeah? So we have talent in Lithuania, but we want them to be in the hotspot in the highest level educational institutions in Europe, mostly, of course, in Netherlands. So we are planning to launch this grant or scholarship schemes for those students to go and get their expertise to learn from the best ones. We are creating I think a very vigorous ecosystem with many stakeholders from business, from academia, from governmental institutions who could foster the technologies, not only before mentioned cultivated meat technologies, but all the alternative protein technologies, included fermentation. So we are working right now to build the ecosystem, to build the talent pool, and to solve the regulatory issues, I would say so.
Thank you. And what about the Ministry of Agriculture? How do you view the role of alternative proteins in the country's agricultural and also economic development?
Aš tikrųjų lietuviškai kalbėsiu, tai noriu atsilikti vertimą.
I will speak in Lithuanian. As regards the development of alternative proteins are the farms. I think we need to carry out the impact assessment. How would that respond and impact the farmers? Of course, if we have alternative protein, that would encourage some animal husbandry farms to shrink. Of course, there is another problem is all the challenges that our animal husbandry poses due to the methane and so on and so forth. We also forget that animal husbandry farms produce a lot of green mass. The greens that need to be cut 3 or 4 times a year, and also CO2 that absorbs CO2.
We learned about cost of reduction, the taste of meat, regulatory challenges that also Yeva has mentioned. What would you say are the main challenges that you have encountered when scaling up cultivated meat production? Would that coincide with what has been said, or would you have
I think
some extra comments?
the primary challenge has been mentioned already. This is a technology that's spun out of human medicine. And so the components that have been used in the research and development phase have been largely pharmaceutical grade components, highly purified, very expensive. And we're going through a journey now of identifying replacements for those components, mostly in the growth media, the nutrient-rich broth that the cells grow in, to get food and feed grade components that are much lower cost. The growth media that the cells are grown in is about 80% of the cost that we're looking at. So as we get that cost down by orders of magnitude, then you're able to come to market with a product that people can afford. So obviously that's a number one goal. I think something that hasn't been mentioned so far is that while there's a clear regulatory pathway in Europe, it's really the gold standard in the world. It's also, unfortunately, one of the longest regulatory pathways in the world, but it is very robust, and the gold standard is we're beginning to see quite a bit of political divisiveness wrapped up in a larger conversation around challenges in conventional agriculture. And so part of what we're here also is to have a robust, transparent conversation about how new technologies in cellular agriculture are symbiotic and can sit at the same time with existing agriculture and complement each other, including, just a quick note, that nutrient-rich broth, the growth media, those nutrients come from crops. In order to feed our cells, you feed them in the way you feed an animal. We need wheat and pea and soy and sugar beets and all of these components, and we want those nutrients to come from European farmers.
Thank you. Yes, Andy.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a quick comment about innovation in this space. So we, as Yeti Food, we're an instrument of the European Union, and we would like to foster growth in diverse proteins. And one of those, of course, is cultivated meat. So one of the things we do is we invest in technologies that help to reduce the cost. We ran a price-based challenge about a year ago on reduction of cost of growth media. And we will make the technologies that come out of it available to any and all firms in the space because it fosters the growth of the entire industry. So we partnered up with the Good Food Institute, GFI, of Europe, and we each put in 250,000 euros to make that happen. In addition to this, and this is really a key aspect also, is what do consumers think about this kind of meat, right? And we found that when you say to someone lab-grown meat, they will say, no, that's terrible, I'm never going to eat that. But if you sit down and explain to them, and we've done it with certain focus groups, when you explain what it is, they will say, oh yeah, well, that sounds pretty good. So we invest, in actual fact, really into teaching people to get not just awareness, but also literacy around alternative and protein diversification, because it is important for everyone to understand what it means, what it does, and what it can do for them and the environment.
See, what do consumers really think?
What do consumers really think? Well, actually, there's been some really interesting polling that GFI is going to release in the next couple of days, which is specifically related to cultivated meat in Germany and Austria. And actually, it shows that consumers are really interested in these products. They're really interested in trying them. There is a degree of a lack of literacy. That's still the case, I think, across Europe.
But in trying them or eating them on regular basis?
Well, trying them, I mean, yeah, buying them, trying them, these kind of things. There's also really, and to build on what Robert said, actually, which is about the fact that the EU has this gold standard regulatory approvals process. I think this is a really important point to bring up again. When we talk about challenges, I think that the sector faces, I don't think that regulation should really be viewed as a challenge in this way. I don't think it's a helpful way of thinking about the kind of dichotomy. I think it's an opportunity and a proof point for the sector to go through the EU's most robust, approvals process in the world, to bring that kind of the evidence that comes with and the kind of really robust, objective narrative that enables you to build then with consumers, to build this trust, to build this kind of desire, I guess, and attractiveness to buy the products. So I think the two are quite interestingly interlinked. But the one thing I would say is that, testing consumer sentiment around a product which is, not on sale in the EU, a lot of people don't know what it is, I think it doesn't give you very accurate results. So I think it's a case of building up that kind of evidence base over time.
If you say that regulatory challenges are not really challenges, would you maybe say, from your perspective, what would the main challenge be? And then also, where are we at in general in terms of alternative proteins compared to, let's say, last year?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's fair to say, I don't like the term challenge, I think, with regulation. I do think there are some opportunities to, maybe make the process in the EU slightly faster, slightly more, collaborative between regulators and companies. I think those are all definitely fair points. But I don't think viewing it as a challenge or as a hurdle to be overcome in a negative sense is particularly helpful. So, and again, if you ask me about what's changed since last year, there's been loads of interesting developments, both in the kind of like product development space. We've seen, new products, companies engaging with regulators in ways that they haven't done before, new products being tested and coming to market, particularly in the plant-based space, which is kind of sometimes neglected in this conversation, but there have been new products that have gone through the regulatory approvals process there. So, and increasing funding as well from both national and EU governments. So there is this kind of, I think there's this recognition that alternative proteins can play a significant role in a future food system, and an increasing willingness to find hooks to engage them in kind of bigger discussions. So like we're discussing today, the bioeconomy, the recognition that actually alternative proteins can be a key pillar of that, I think is something that's been developing over the last year.
Thank you. Andy?
Just a quick one. So I think there's actually a structural problem with protein diversification, and the structural problem is around the private sector investments, because the private sector, so like VCs, PE firms, etc., they like to come in the front end, and in actual fact, there are two valleys of death for these firms, and the GFI actually has a lot of documentation on this and proof points. So usually when the investors come in, they want to invest in software and other asset-light technologies, which they can go to prototype quickly and start to generate, put a dent into the cost. In the protein diversification, there's a difference between doing a bioreactor that kicks out 100 liters of product versus going into industrial scale production. So there are investments that require much more capital expense, and they also have a higher risk than the usual investments, right? And that really makes the private investors shy away from some of these technologies, particularly the ones that are capital intensive. That's a structural problem that can only be overcome by governments actually investing more money into crowding in the private sector. But that investment usually tapers off after the first valley of death. And that's a real problem. And that's another big problem that, again, the GFI actually identified. In the food sector, the investments by governments is actually much lower than in all kinds of other green technologies, and by a factor of 300 in actual fact. 300 billion, 1 billion. And that makes no sense because, again, the GFI found out that every dollar invested in food and food technologies actually has a 3 times more effectiveness than any other green technology investments. So in other words, if we want to solve the climate puzzle, governments would really do well to invest in this particular piece. So just wanted to know there's a structural thing that needs to be overcome. There's a really, really key issue that needs to be discussed and handled.
Yeah, and since we have representatives from the government, from the ministries, do comment, please.
I think that there's one very important thing I must note. If you listened closely to the discussion, you could hear that there was saying that the issues are scale up. The issues are not enough government funds. The issues are, for example, like a few years ago, nobody was talking about scale up or about not enough investment from the government. Everybody was doubting the technology itself. Yeah. Right now, we are talking like we have a product on the shelves in some countries, or we are having them very soon. And now we are talking about how to scale this up. So from my point of view, from my perspective, I think that it is very important to be in that discussion for Lithuania. We have a great example in Lithuania in growing our life science sector. Like right now, we have a life science sector that is 2.5% of GDP. We are planning to grow it by 2030 to 5%. And just a few years ago, the sector was minuscule. So we have an annual growth of 22%, and 90% of our life science sector are exports. We have companies in Lithuania that are global leaders. We have Thermo Fisher, even here in the audience. We have Teva, we have Hollister, all these grand names that weren't like 10, 15 years ago, they weren't here in Lithuania. And now Lithuania is proud to say that life sciences is one of the drivers of our economy. And here, we can have the same with the alternative proteins and with food production as well. And I think that's very important, not only because of ethical aspects, not only because of economical aspects, but the food security is one topic that we haven't touched today. And in Europe, when Russia has brought the war back to our continent, food security is a hot topic and a sensitive one that needs to be addressed. So I think that are the reasons why we need to talk about it today and why Lithuania has to be a part of a discussion.
It's very important what you're saying. I will give you the word in a minute. I just want to clarify, when you say that we want to become a hub, I think that was the wording used for alternative protein production and research. That's quite different from just being part in the discussion.
Sure, of course. I wouldn't be a member of Economy and Innovation Ministry because, of course, we want to have investors here. Of course, we are inviting them to explore possibilities to invest here in Lithuania. Of course, we are not doing it just to have a tasting rules, if nobody's coming here to present the product. Yeah. And of course, we want our local businessmen and local scientists to develop these products here if we think and we agree that this is one of very important food production technologies in the future, and that is like 10 years from now.
Thank you. Sis.
Yeah, I just wanted to actually build on what the Vice Minister said in terms of what Lithuania has been able to do in the life science sector is pretty remarkable over a very short period of time. And I think it speaks to actually what the panel before us was talking about, the idea of having strategies, of setting long-term visions with tangible deliverables that have actual political buy-in right from the centre of government. So bringing all those different ministries together to agree on a common position, a common vision that's not just little buckets of policy activity here and there. It's not just tastings or something else. It's actually, where do we want the sector to grow to? What do we want it to deliver economically in terms of jobs? I think that's actually something that could be really, hugely valuable for the alternative protein sector. If I could make one, recommendation about the policy changes, it wouldn't be this kind of, this like picking specific measures. It would be try to build a vision of what we want the sector to become. And I think that's exactly what could start to happen in Lithuania.
So that's very important. But what is also important is going back to the very customers themselves, which we have discussed already, but there are questions coming in related to it. For example, I think, Sith, you have mentioned a specific poll that is coming out soon, but there's a question that maybe someone else would want to pick up on. Have you done reliable polls on how many people in your country, whichever country you want to choose, would like to switch from real meat to synthetic? And then I lost it, but there was also a very good question related to it.
Have there been scientific research with regard to impact on human health?
It's done on the impact on human health, growing alternative meat, and would that not cause more allergies and other,
I can pick up on the last one, and I think that industry professionals may share some poll results. Talking about the research, so this particular technology must have an approval of institutions in European Union. It has to go through food safety regulation. That is one of the strictest, and as it was mentioned, it's the gold standard globally. So there is no way we can there is no need to do it locally specifically, because it's already going through the procedures in the European Union. And no doubt in our own research capabilities, but there is a standardized procedure for this type of regulation. Also FDA approvals in the United States. So I don't think that this is some kind of issue that cannot be answered in very coherent manner.
Would you maybe want to pick up on the price? Because you're from the Ministry of Economy, can you provide a price comparison? And someone else's answer would also be fine, between 1 kilogram of real meat and lab-grown meat.
Yeah,
Robert?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up and also just add quickly to the comment here. In addition to the the risk assessment and authorization that'll be done by the European Food Safety Authority and the Commission. There's also over 20 million euro worth of Horizon Europe projects going on right now, 3 of them that are looking at some of these additional issues. And just to be clear, the standard in the novel foods law in Europe for us to bring a product to market, for example, cultivated beef from my company, Mosa Meat, it has to be the same nutritional standards or better than the current offering. So we have a high bar to meet to begin with. In terms of price, we know we will enter the, and I'm speaking, I think, for every company, we know we'll enter the market first at a premium because we'll have lower production scale and volumes will be lower. Most companies will enter through a sort of a gastro approach through restaurants first. That can kind of absorb that higher margin with chefs being the messengers until we get our production scale up and are able to deliver at higher volumes, get those retail contracts. And we think we can reach price parity with a kilo of beef, for example, in the 3 to 5 year range after market introduction. What's exciting is also we think in the long term we potentially can offer the product at even lower prices because of efficiencies. Speaking about a cow, for example, relatively feed to food ratio is lower than our final production process would be. But the important part, coming back to consumers, I think that I really want to hammer home, I don't think the right question is how many people will replace or switch completely, because that's not the goal ultimately. Our bread and butter for our markets will be quote unquote flexitarians, people who are switching 1 or 2 meals a week to have a lower carbon footprint in their diet.
So there is no, goal to not use animal meat at all. I mean, you don't expect if customers to just completely refuse the animal meat whatsoever in, let's say, 100 years?
I don't think that's a realistic goal. I think animal agriculture will always play a critical role in global food systems for the foreseeable future. Where my mind really is in this conversation is what was referenced earlier. I think Nita said it. We expect a 50% or more increase in meat consumption globally. Meat consumption in Europe is going down, but in countries like China and India with a growing middle class, meat consumption is skyrocketing. And we're already at planetary boundaries now. So how do we meet that extra meat demand in the next 30 years without blowing across more planetary boundaries and doing damage? And we see our product as one of the tools in a toolbox, not a silver bullet, but one of the things that should be added in as a complement, including traditional animal husbandry.
Vytautas, may I go back to you, because you mentioned that, the animal farms, and it will be important to do calculations in the animal farms. And now we're hearing that, the extra meat demand will be there. Would you maybe comment on that, and also on what you think Lithuanian consumers, on how ready they are to try the alternative meat? I'm not sure if the ministry would be the institution that would have carried out a poll like that, but maybe you would have a figure or two for us to hear.
Taip, tai jeigu kalbant apie
Well, talking about resilience and sustainability in husbandry farms and mixed farms, I believe that the development of alternative proteins would contribute to the increase of resilience in the agriculture sector, because as we know, alternative proteins need protein raw material that would encourage lower exports and higher share of processing. But I believe that that would not satisfy all the sustainability pillars, which are social responsibility and governance. And I do not see how alternative proteins would contribute to the alternative resistance if that would cause reduction of husbandry farms. And if alternative proteins encourage or have an impact on the decrease of husbandry farms, that would also have an impact on the soil degradation and other negative impacts, which should also bear in mind that there is biodiversity which has been formed over thousands of years, and each user of natural meat contributes to the preservation of nature and preservation of biodiversity. But in any case, I believe that we should do our homework, because we should be able to produce alternative proteins, so that in case we no longer have space on Earth to raise animals, we would be able to make use of alternative proteins.
Mrs. asking, thinking a future French nomenclature regulation and past Italian ban on cultured meat producers, and in a way what the Lithuanian ministry is saying as well. Would someone like to take that one, Robert?
Yeah, I'll take a first stab at it. First of all, I really appreciate your openness to the conversation, and I think what you referenced is a really important topic, is the role that regenerative agriculture will play in food systems reform, and the critical role that soil health will play in long-term in right-siding food systems. Again, our viewpoint is that these things go together and they complement each other. We are able to make intensive protein production with a drastically lower carbon footprint, use of resources like land and water, while you also layer in more regenerative agriculture, which would require more land and improve soil health. In terms of the politics that we're seeing in some member states, which I think is unfortunate and short-sighted, at the end of the day, the decision to approve cultivated meat or precision fermentation produced dairy, other things that are novel foods, it's an EU-level decision. The ban in Italy is quite obviously a derogation of EU law and will be struck down, and I think is mostly political theater. But what it does say to me is we need to do a better job of working with stakeholders so that they understand the role that our technology can play in Europe and in the global picture, so that we can move past this level of polarization and move the conversation forward about how do we feed a growing planet within our planetary boundaries.
And we can start, lowering those gaps here, because there are questions that are related specifically with the end users and end users of the artificial meat. And there's a very interesting one, and I'm sure that someone sees it, maybe you would have an interesting comment here. As a consumer, I would prefer to buy meat from small local farmers instead from supermarkets, as I have access to that. But the majority of population suffer from lack of good quality meat. Question, are we honest? Who will be the end users of artificial meat? Lower classes?
I don't think that's the way that I'm perceiving the future of the sector. I think Robert gave a pretty good description of how he's imagining this meat's going to come to market, and I don't think it necessarily is kind of class distinctions, as it were. And I think actually the point I would just say is to build on what Robert said, is that there's a world in which both of these things can be possible. That you can buy, delicious premium meat, I guess, from your local, collective, whatever it looks like. You can buy lab-grown meat or alternative proteins rather in supermarkets. I don't think there needs to be a kind of distinction necessarily that's made on class grounds. I don't know if you want to add on that, Robert, about your vision of how the breakdown will come when these products come to market.
And also, have we covered the allergy aspect? Do you remember there was an allergy aspect in the question, Robert? That would be, Seth?
Maybe I could just come in on the allergy one, because I think this is actually really, really important. And I think it's particularly important when we think about how these products are going to be labelled when they come onto the EU market. So labelling is a conversation that will take place at the EU level as part of the approvals process. One of the kind of live, I guess, discussions at the moment is whether we can use, like meaty nomenclature and terms for these products, whether we can call it cultivated pork, cell-cultured lamb, whatever it might look like. Actually, the allergenicity point is critical there, because if you have an allergy to a certain kind of meat, a certain kind of seafood, that needs to be really clearly described on the packaging, on the label. Because this comes from cells, you are likely to have the same reactions that you would do if you had those allergies. So I think it is a really important point, and I think it's something that needs to be factored in when we're speaking about kind of communication with consumers and that willingness to give evidence-based consumer information on terminologies.
Yeah, Andy?
I'd just like to add that I think we still have a lot of work to do in in consumer literacy building,
Yes,
because
and there is a question related to
Yeah.
that. Let me read it so it sounds even more relevant. How is the capacity building and education envisioned for alternative proteins at the EU level and the national one as well? And there are some options: citizen assemblies, courses, workshops, campaigns. What specifically?
Yeah. So first of all, so in the audience, somebody said artificial meat, right? So actually, that's not artificial; that's real meat. So that just wanted to be clear on this. Also, there's terms like synthetic meat and Frankenstein meat and stuff like that. None of those really help in these discussions. But I think it's important to also realize we're not just talking about cultivated meat when we're talking about protein diversification. There's also plant-based meat. There's also meat from, sorry, not just meat, but alternative proteins, not just meat proteins, but there's proteins from plants, and there's also protein from algae, which is another really growing sector. And 2 weeks ago, I was in Dubai and there at a conference specifically for alternative proteins, and all the excitement was around sweeteners, sweet proteins. So that seems to be the new frontier that's really going to help to, again, land use and such like, because there's a lot of sugar beet grown and a lot of, it's very intensive in terms of energy use, water use, and stuff like that. So sweet proteins, mark my words, is going to be another really big market, but there's many more aspects to it. So with that, say again, what's being done in the European Union? I think more and more universities put green and agri-food onto their particular curricula. So, for example, just recently, the Maastricht School of Management asked me to help them to develop a agri-food MBA, right? So, because they believe that it's important to have a specialization that focuses on this, a big part of which will, of course, be protein diversification. So there is a strong movement, and I think the European Union also supports this piece, right? So we do MOOCs, massively open online courses. We have several thousands of people that attend them every year, where we, again, give them more literacy. We also have a website. It costs us really a lot of money. A website called Food Unfolded, and Richard has the carrot on his lapel. That's our logo for it. It's available in 4 languages, where consumers are informed on a science-based, neutral basis about everything you ever wanted to know about food systems, and particularly protein diversification. To say nothing of the fact that we also have a protein diversification think tank, which most recently circulated a policy paper, and before that a white paper that was widely circulated within the Commission and other places.
Having said that, some members of our audience remain particularly skeptical about alternative proteins. So now this will be your last chance to kind of defend it, because there is an anonymous asking in Lithuanian. They're saying, we don't understand, why would Lithuania need alternative proteins? We want natural proteins. We want real taste, real food. Maybe the big countries need it, but we don't. And then another one, which I think is my favorite, it's sort of begging. What are the pros and cons of artificial meat? Please, could you answer honestly? So maybe each of you, very briefly, because we technically have 0 minutes left, but let's say we have 2 minutes left. 2 words each. The biggest advantage and the biggest disadvantage. See.
Yeah, in 2 words, it's a tough task. I mean, I would say, echoing what Robert said, like the environmental footprint of these products, we know that meat consumption is going to grow. We need to make meat in a different way. That's the reality. And I think actually the opportunity that comes with in terms of job creation, investment, onshoring, makes it an opportunity rather than something that needs to be kind of seen as a challenge.
Any cons?
Any cons? I mean, for me, the con is that the sector is growing from a relatively small space still. This is we're not talking about everyone being able to buy this at very cheap prices in the next 5 to 10 years. It's going to take a while for it to grow. So.
Indeed, the environmental aspect is obvious, and then the con.
So the con would be currently the cost, and in some cases also taste and texture. So that's a bit of a problem that consumers don't like, is when they sometimes eat it, they're like, that's not exactly what I wanted. Yet.
Thank you. Robert?
Yeah, I think for the skeptics in the room, don't buy the products. At the end of the day, no, I mean, it really, at the end of the day, this is about bringing more products to market to give consumers a choice. And some people will choose to never buy these products, and that's okay.
You know, they might say they will never do it, but in fact, they might want to try it out if you, you know, kind of lure them enough.
Yeah, and we get that. We get that there are folks that we will never convince, but we also know that we have, you know, tens of thousands of people on our wait list at Mosa Meat alone, folks who want a tasting, who want to try the product. And the early adopters and the innovators who try the products in the first generation, they will then communicate to their friends and family that they tried it and normalize these things. And I think in 10 years, in terms of consumer adoption, this will be a very different conversation because everyone will know someone who's tried a cultivated meat product, and it'll be a different conversation.
Thank you. Yeva?
Robert just stole mine. I actually thought about that we need to put more stress on alternative proteins because it's a choice, you know. You can choose, and we cannot prohibit some users who would like to choose that. Yeah, some consumers who want to try it. And on the negative side, there's one thing that I think that we are talking about the technology, but we are not thinking about the future enough. We are in global competition, even if we are not feeling it right now.
Yeah, that's
we
very
have
important.
guests from Israel. We would love to have guests from Singapore that are already using the technology on like a normal basis. So we need to think about that more.
Let's hope to have them here next
Yes,
year.
definitely.
The users from Singapore. Vytautai, labai trumpai. Pagrindinis
Vytautas, very briefly, the main pros and cons. Well, I am in favor of natural meat.
It's a very dynamic panel. I want to really thank all of the panelists. And before you give them a big round of applause, some logistics. We will come back here at 11:40 to continue with a youth discussion. So you may have now a networking break, have some coffee, relax, and do come back here in 20 minutes. Thank you all very much.